We hear that humility is a virtue and that our accomplishments will speak for themselves. But are these idioms true in today's boastful marketplace? Does the squeaky wheel get the grease, or does the nail that sticks up get pounded down? How do we convey our victories and achievements in exciting and engaging ways? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes even flat-out lies. Join us as we leave the echo chamber and speak with the brag lady herself.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing. And for today's episode, the bombastic buddy of beneficial bragging, Colin Jeffries. Colin, how you doing today?
I'm good, Paul. Maybe settling into the bombastic mentality here. I'll try not to beat my chest and brag too much. But I think we're in for a treat today.
I absolutely think so too. Looking forward to our guest.
Well, let's bring her into the conversation. We're joined today by Peggy Klaus. With a background in theater, media production, and opera, she brings a captivating and energetic approach to executive communications coaching. She has helped leaders from the Fortune 500 to startups ascend to the highest levels in their chosen professions. Her groundbreaking work can be found in publications such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fortune Magazine, and Harvard Business Review. She is the best-selling author of the books Brag and The Hard Truth About Soft Skills. Peggy is a recipient of the prestigious Coach of the Year award, and she believes that to be successful, you need to have guts, grit, and gravitas. Welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, Peggy Klaus.
It's great to be here with you both.
Well, we are thrilled to jump into the conversation. Peggy, before we get too deep, you have a couple of phrases that you've coined, and I think it's really helpful to start with definitions. So if you could help our audience understand brag bites, bragalogues, and a brag bag, I think those will really help lay the foundation for how they intertwine and what we're talking about as we get into today's conversation.
I will, and hopefully, excuse me, I won't forget them. I want to start first with what I mean about bragging, because I mean it in the good way. And I don't want your audience to think of this as a negative four-letter word. I want them to reframe it and think of it as a most positive four-letter word, just like I do. So talking about yourself does not imply arrogance or boastfulness. That's the result of bad bragging. And some of those behaviors, which I'm sure we'll get into more, are talking incessantly, never asking about others, interrupting, bringing the conversation back to you, exaggerating, and outright lying. So good bragging is subtle and it's seamless and it works its way into business and social interactions. And so that's what I mean by good bragging, being able to take pride in yourself and being able to talk about your accomplishments and your successes, the obstacles you've overcome with real delight. So I wanted to get that first because a lot of people think of this in a very negative way. Okay, let me see if I can remember what you asked me there, Colin. Brag bites are just little tidbits of information that you collect in what I call a brag bag. And they're things that your colleagues have said about you, compliments from your clients, and you weave them into what I call a bragalogue, which is truly just a short, pithy, conversational story, which weaves together those little brag bites we were just talking about. And you say this in a enthusiastic and energetic way. And thus, because you're so delighted to tell your audience this, they're delighted to hear it, and they will ask you more questions about you.
Yeah, and Peggy, I've heard of brag books when applying to college for applications and brag books for coming to an interview for a job. And it seems like that's all self-contained into something that's not portrayed verbally. So interested to hear your thoughts on how to verbalize what people are writing down as opposed to it all being contained just in a book.
Oh, well, the whole thing is to be able to get it out on your tongue and to tell people, whether you're in a professional situation or a personal situation, Paul. Otherwise, really, truly, how do they know? So I've worked for almost 30 years with a wide range of, executives, managers, students, grad students, on how they can talk about themselves in an interesting and grabbing way for their audience. So once you've got your bragalogue down, again, just a short, and I really underline short, pithy, conversational story. Once you have that written down, then you have to what I call lift it off the page, which is a technique that we as actors use to take a script and make it our own. And we do this by uh, different methods, one of which I use with my clients is paraphrasing what you said there. So it doesn't sound like you're a robot. You know how often when you go to networking and conference and people, you say, "Oh, well, tell me about you," or "What do you do?" And they say, "I'm a marketing consultant and I've worked for this, that, and the other, and I do this, that, and the other." And your eyes roll back in your head and you think to yourself, "Oh, please, I want to go get another gin and tonic." And so it is about making it conversational. And think about it. If I asked you to tell me about your favorite trip that you've ever taken or a most recent trip that you really loved, you wouldn't say, "Well, Peggy, first I want to tell you about the trip I just took. And then I'd like to tell you about this. And then I'll tell you, I'm going to wrap up." No, you would be able to say, "Oh my gosh, Peggy, we started in Switzerland, in Lucerne, and we saw all the incredible sights. And then we moved on to here." And you would be enthusiastic and energetic and delighted, and you would move us and have the images. And that's exactly what good braggers do.
Well, and Peggy, it's funny that you mention somebody's favorite trip or a recent trip, because typically if you are seeing somebody and you go, "Oh man, I heard that you just went on this trip. Tell me about it." They're excited and they can convey it in a way that is pithy and engaging because you're probably not the first person that they've told about it. So let's explore a little bit, if you can, the importance of being prepared. I think this is where the brag bag comes in handy, because it's not somebody asking you, "Hey, Peggy, what have you been working on recently?" And you're all of a sudden shuffling through your mind going, "Okay, I've got this project. Is that relevant? I've got that project. I'm not sure which one I talk about." When you are prepared and somebody asks you, "Oh, what are you working on?" you can immediately pull something up that is engaging, pithy, and to your point, brags in a good way, and it's not self-aggrandizing.
You're so right. And I have something called a flyby. When we, in the old days, when we were primarily in the office, people would fly by each other in the hall, at the water cooler, in the cafeteria, and they'd say, "So, Colin, what's up? What are you working on?" Right? And not you, Colin, but most people would probably say, "Oh, nothing much. Things aren't bad." Right? You have lost an incredible opportunity to brag about yourself and get the other person excited about what it is that you're doing. So I created this technique called flybys, where you are prepared, where you think about what it is that you're doing and you're excited about, and the accomplishment, the obstacle you've overcome, so that when someone flies by you in the hall and they say, "So, Colin, what's up?" And you say, "Oh my gosh, I've just gotten 5 billion people to listen to our podcast and it's gone, huge." Then that is something that that person that you have just bragged to, can take with them. Right? I mean, how many times have people have said to me, my boss or the boss's boss will see me and come into my office and say, "Well, what are you working on?" And I go, "Well, nothing much." Well, there you go. And they then go, "Nothing much." Well, then, thinking to themselves, "What are you doing here?"
Exactly. Or sometimes the response is almost the least important thing that we're working on, right? "What are you working on?" "Oh, I'm going through the weekly reports." right? Oh, that's really low level, when instead we could be talking about, oh, I just consulted with our sales team on their go-to-market strategy. There's so many different levers that we likely could be pulling when somebody asks us that question. Now, Peggy, you did mention, quote unquote, in the olden days. How does somebody via Slack or Microsoft Teams or email or what have you, without again trying to walk the line of not being self-aggrandizing and pompous, how do they go about explaining, here's some cool things I'm working on, again in that sort of subtle and engaging way? Because tone is really difficult when it's just text.
That's true. And there's a whole area of virtual bragging that we can talk about. But if you're going to do it, Slack, text, email, again, keep it short, right? Because we don't want a laundry list. We don't want a tome. We don't need a novella. And think about tuning into the radio station, WIFT FM. What's in it for them? Making a connection for them to what you're doing. So, transitional phrases, guys, like, I know you've been working on this, and I wanted to tell you about what's going on with the work that my team and I are doing. Or, I saw you talking with so and so, and I'm wondering if this would be helpful for you in your articles for them. Oh, I wanted to tell you that 6 months I've been working on this CEO, and I finally got a call with her. So those are kinds of things that you can use. In addition, we are going back more hybrid. So those opportunities of the flyby, of making sure that you go in and let your boss know of something that she or he would be excited about. Um, when you're virtual on Zoom, because a lot of people say to me, "Oh, Peggy, it's impossible. We're on Zoom and our time's really constrained." I said, "Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. If you're excited about something and that comes over the airwaves and makes other people excited, it's infectious." And also how it affects the team and your boss and the company. And if you are, and I know you have a lot of managers and leaders on this call, it behooves you to make sure that you do a brag catch up at your weekly meetings. Go around and say, I want you to tell me one success, one obstacle you've overcome this week. And that way, people get the chance to do it, and they also get to hear what others are doing.
Well, and I feel like that does a great job of avoiding the non sequitur as well, where if we're all together and, oh, okay, let's all talk about a victory that we've had. Peggy, you go first. Okay, great. And then Paul's going to go, what about you, Colin? And then it's not me going, let me talk about myself and all the cool stuff I'm doing. Anybody else want to share?
Okay. But listen to Paul. Did you hear the tone of voice, the intonation?
Absolutely.
Right? And that's what people say to me. Well, Peggy, oh, let me tell you about myself. And they get this obnoxious,
Right.
boastful tone of voice. And I say, wait a minute, why did you go into that characterization? That does not have to be it, but we all, yes, I will use this global term, that people either think of talking about themselves, taking pride in themselves, as either you are on one side of the scale of being braggadocious and obnoxious and self-aggrandizing and boorish, or you are ineffectually humble. There's the middle ground, and that's what we need to achieve.
That totally makes sense. Peggy, you talked about the flybys in the office, and when the boss stops into somebody's office and asks about what's going on, and hey, nothing much. But the alternative to that, how do you coach people that always start out negatively? Like, in my career, when I've coached and mentored people myself, a lot of times they start out with, hey, how's it going? What's going on with your day? And a lot of people that I've worked with in the past have started out with a negative light, as opposed to being braggadocious or bragging about themselves. How do you coach people to turn it around where the negative doesn't start out because of how their day might be going, but to turn it around in the fact that they are doing some great things, and how to convey that to their coworkers or their boss?
Okay, so we have to get a little psychological here. And I'm not a psychologist. I almost played one on TV, but I do a lot of armchair psychology. And I think you have to ask the person, you know, I've been experiencing you as coming across negatively when I say, hey, tell me about what's up and what you're doing. Are you aware of that? And they'll either say yes, yay, or nay. Often they won't even be aware of it. You cannot believe how many people are unaware of how they come across and how they communicate. Um, and once we started the conversation, I would say, well, what do you think that impression leaves us with if you start off negatively? So get them to think about how they're coming across and what impression that they're leaving. And they will probably come up with, oh, uh, it's either boring or negative or a Debbie Downer. Oh, I don't want to do that. And then coach them to start off with saying something positive. And I don't mean to be a Pollyanna by any means, because there is stuff that people have to talk about that is not, pleasant, and that we may not want to hear as a boss or a CEO. But starting off negative is really sets the stage just to spiral in further conversation. So that's the way I would approach it, Paul.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people that are in that space, either maybe they're not happy with their current position, or they just get overwhelmed, what I've realized, or stressed out, and whatever's they're thinking about in that moment comes out first. And being able to reposition that and to pivot a little bit, that's a great point, Peggy, is to ask those questions and to be able to swing it the other way when their boss is asking them the next time. Start out with all the great things, because a lot of these teammates and employees in the past have been really, really good. It's just a matter of catching them in the moment or unexpectedly, and to be able to really be able to communicate that first and foremost, because there are a lot of great things that people are doing in today's world.
Right. And if you say to them also, as an addendum to my questions, would be, how do you feel about talking positively about yourself? Is that a problem? And then you can, if you've read the book or heard me speak, you can say, well, let's turn that around, right? Um, because it's really important the way people set the stage for conversations. And if you go in with that negativity, that's what's going to continue.
Do you recommend that we, as supervisors of folks who may be a little bit negative, or when we say, hey, what's going on? They go, I need help with this. I need help with this. I feel overwhelmed by that. That we phrase the question in a way that's more of like, hey, what's a recent victory that you've had?
Great reframe. So I would start out with that. And then, Colin, I would go to, now, tell me one or two things that are priorities for you in improving. And how are you doing that? How are you thinking about doing that? And then if the conversation needs, some help from you, you could say, well, how can I be of help? That way you don't open Pandora's box. right? Because they're just going to give you a laundry list of negativity and things that they need. And if you give them parameters, then they have to say, and if they go, well, I could use this and this, and then you say, I only want to deal with the top 2 or 3 right now.
That makes a lot of sense, because then we're able to actually affect some benefit. If somebody gives you a laundry list of 20 things, like, I need some help here, it's really difficult for a manager or a leader to prioritize that. So I like that idea of framing it and allowing them to actually tell you what their priorities are. Now, Peggy, we talked a lot about self-awareness. Let's talk a little bit about what I would consider is just general atmosphere awareness. As somebody who acted and produced and sang and all that stuff, I'm sure that you have a lot of insight as to reading an audience, reading a crowd, and adjusting accordingly. How do people read a room, so to speak, and make sure that when they're telling their stories, that they're being engaging, that they're not coming across as self-aggrandizing, and they're not eating up too much oxygen in the room, so to speak? How do we read people and make sure that they're engaged as we tell our stories?
Hmm. This is a huge area. We could take several podcasts discussing this, but I'm going to try and make it bite-sized for you. First, let's go back. I teach my clients a template called setting the stage, because years ago, I was finding that even the executives, the C-suite folks, didn't have a way to prepare and practice for their town halls, media, board meetings, analyst meetings, all kinds of things. And so my stat here is that most professionals do not prepare in the way that they need to in order to fully impact an audience. So what happens is that 80% of the time, when they don't prepare and practice in the way that they need to, they fail. And I don't mean that they stammer and stutter and run off the stage, or like a cartoon character that the floor opens up and they're eaten. It means truly that they don't grab their audience's hearts and minds. 20% of the time, when they wing it, when they don't prepare the way they should, they succeed. And guys, that's just enough of a reinforcer for them to keep winging it. So, first of all, you've got to have a template. You've got to think about things like WIFTFM. What's in it for them? Who's the audience? What are their goals, needs, and objectives? In short, why are they putting their butts in those seats to listen to you? What must they know? So, for example, Colin, you're ready to go on stage, and I tap you on the shoulder. And I said, "Oh, Colin, I am so sorry to tell you this, but you have 3 minutes instead of an hour." What must they know? Other than that, the ceiling's going to come down in 3 minutes, and there are the exits. And okay, so 3 minutes of what must they know? Okay, so, and there's lots of other things like emotional temperature of the audience and your own emotional temperature and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's first. And then being able to, what I said before, lift the material off the page and be able to storytell and make it fluid and conversational, and think about vocal tone and pause and pitch and speed and volume, and also your body language, your gesticulation, because let me see if I can get this stat right. 58% of what the audience takes away from the speaker is physical. 38% is vocal, tone, pause, pitch, volume, speed. 7% is content. Now, I don't want you and Paul or your audience to go away and say, I listened to this woman and she says the content isn't important because I will come and stalk you. I will come and stalk you people. But it is absolutely crucial. I mean, it's critical. And you have to be the expert in your field. But you have to think about the other components of what makes you dynamic and impactful and appeal to the hearts and minds of your audience. And if you don't, you've lost it. And in terms of reading your audience, my feeling is that if you are excited about what it is that you're telling them and you tell these stories and make it pertinent to them, they will come along with you. And if not, well, we get bored like we are so often.
I really appreciate the fact that your recommendations when you're talking to a single person at the water cooler or your supervisor, or when you're talking to an audience of, the board of directors or maybe hundreds of people, it's really pretty similar. You think about them, what they want, what they're going to get out of it. You consolidate your message, you practice and prepare. So I think it's just encouraging to know, hey, if you want to advance in your career and convey your accomplishments in a way that is tasteful, you don't have to have 15 or 20 different characteristics that you have to go develop and these new skills you have to learn. Really, there are a few skills: practice, know your audience, be aware of what they're doing, those sorts of things. So I want to say that I think that's really valuable and convenient that they're the same. Peggy, I'll ask you kind of a random question, but opera, I know from reading your book and listening to some of the keynotes you've done and everything that as a child, you planned on going to law school because your father was a lawyer, and then you decided to kind of pivot and go into what I would consider the arts and media. Talk about how just the experience of opera and performance has impacted your career trajectory, because I feel like so often I'm hearing from people, major in a STEM and make sure, like science, technology, engineering, math, and then make sure that you're leveraging that because that's seen as more analytical. But we seem to be losing out on the soft skills. And obviously you authored the book, The Hard Truth About Soft Skills. So just, I guess, give us a little discourse on that.
Have you two ever seen the movie The Accidental Tourist?
I have not. It sounds like it's worth watching, though.
It is worth watching. It's who is the guy? William Hurt. And I say that because my career has been the accidental career, because I never thought that I would be doing what I'm doing. And I think where it weaves in is that when I was in Hollywood, whether I was working with comedians right at the beginning, when comedians were getting their own TV shows, and I had produced a comedy show and I'd worked with all these comedians, and then I worked with interviewers and I worked with music performers and broadcast news people. The thing that's so essential is to really understand what is unique and special about you, which is the core of what I did with all of those entertainers. That was the first thing that I worked with them on. And then developing that, enhancing that, elevating that. And then, this is very crass, but putting them out to market. Where would their persona and their skills fit best so that they could be most successful? I did that in the entertainment business with all of those performers. And then when friends of mine who were climbing the corporate ladder in the financial services firm, something I knew nothing about, and when they called and said, Peggy, please, I've been promoted and I need to give this big presentation, and I'm 28 years old and there are white guys who are 50 and 60 and they are so pissed that I got this job, and I walked into these investment banks dressed all in black and a flappy hat and very, artsy. And I found that these people, of course, as you know, and I later learned that they're incredibly smart. They can talk for hours about what they do, but they do it in a really pedantic, boring, formulaic self. And when I saw that in the mid 90s, what was being offered to them in terms of training, I said, this stinks. And I've got to come in here and create my own. And fortunately, I had people who were willing to go with me. And because it was really out of the box, it was before people like myself who had been in the arts were transferring over to doing this kind of communication, presentation, leadership skills. And so a lot of the things that I had them do were very outside their comfort zone, but they got results and they were pleased. So then they told people about me and it just, grew. He says, a client of mine years ago said, Klaus, you're like the mold on my shower curtain. You just keep growing. And I said, that is the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
And you took those skills as well to address doctor-patient communication, because that's an extreme area of frustration where patients feel like the doctor spent 8 minutes with me and 5 of those minutes he was on his device charting, or I expressed my concerns to her and she didn't feel like she really heard them. Talk a little bit about that too, how very intelligent, highly educated individuals sometimes can learn a thing or two about communication and I hate to say bedside manner because that seems to restrict it, but there's a lot about how people are perceiving your engagement.
Oh, Colin, I wish every doctor in the United States just heard your statement. The way it came about was I was a primary caregiver for a very, very dear friend who had liver cancer. And when he passed away, I was saying to a friend of mine, I have been just appalled at the way that the doctors communicate with the families and with the patient. And my friend ejected from her seat at lunch and said, that's what you should do, Peg. And I said, what? And she said, you should teach doctors how to communicate. And I said, I don't know anything about medicine. And then I thought, well, that's never stopped me before. So I went and fortunately I found these 2 fabulous doctors, one on each coast, one at UCLA, one at NYU. And they were just starting in, I believe it was 92, to think about doctor-patient communication because there had been a very significant study on malpractice and how 85% of malpractice cases would be null and void if doctors learned how to communicate with patients and families. So I created a curriculum with them and they loved my acting background. And we were the first ones to create the simulations between what were, actors as the patients and doctors. And I taught in a lot of med programs and internship and residency programs. And then, unfortunately, some of the schools wanted my intellectual property, for free. And I said, no, no, even I know that's not right. And that was right when my friends called from Wall Street. And so I got out of that work. But I don't know how it is now. When I went to lecture at medical schools and do very experiential work, it was the only work that they were doing in this venue at that point. So I hope it's gotten better.
That's great. So, Peggy, this is a Rethink Marketing podcast. So, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit, talking about marketing. And we were just talking about communication skills. How do you feel like strong communication skills can help with marketing strategies in the fast paced digital world?
Well, you guys know this and your audiences know this, that unless you're able to communicate and self promote, no one is going to know what your value is, whether it's digitally or whether it is in person. And, I'll tell you, Paul, so much has changed even since I had a publicist 8 years ago. So I'm relearning this whole thing. And, I think it's really crucial to be, I use this word so often, pithy and concise and succinct, and to really know not only how you see yourself, but how other people see you. So I will tell you that, especially for women, and I don't know what the demographics are for your audience, but women have a very difficult time talking about themselves and owning their what I call faboo-ness, that they're just faboo. I'm not saying that men don't have this as well, but because of our cultural, societal, familial, and even religious ways that we have been, I'll say, indoctrinated, women have a very difficult time owning their power. And they really need to do this, to step up, to say, yes, I am a fabulous marketer. My clients say this about me. So here's the situation. I was working with about 75 women in San Francisco for getting on boards. And I had worked with them in terms of their written applications, but now it was about, as you discussed before, how do you get it out on your tongue? How do you verbalize this? And I called a woman up and I said, I want you to tell us your name and what you do. And she gets up, introduces herself, tells us she's a software engineer, and tells us all about the company. And all of a sudden, she stops dead and she says, oh my God, I forgot to tell you that I founded the company.
That seems like a very important piece of information.
And there was, as you can imagine, a lot of kind of uncomfortable laughing from these 75 other women. I dropped to my knees and I screamed, you buried the lead. I said, ladies, I know that it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not. And if she had a penis, that would be the first thing out of her mouth. And everybody clapped and agreed. So that's what it's very, very difficult for women and for people of diverse communities, because not only do they have to deal with the bragging myths that we all grew up with, but they also have to deal with biases that conscious and unconscious that they deal with in the workplace. So it is harder for them.
Are there steps that, I mean, Paul and I are both white male executive marketers. Are there steps that we can take to make that easier in creating environments of psychological safety and things of that nature where maybe we're kind of leading the witness, so to speak, and allowing people of diverse communities or women to step into their power?
Sure. Well, let me ask you both how you do that now.
Yeah, I think one thing that I do that has been really helpful is, I mean, my team is primarily female, and I have one, I guess, non-heterosexual person on my team. and there's a lot of age diversity as well. So I have several people that are, this is their first job out of school. They've been here for a couple of years, and then other people where they have, multiple decades of experience. And we sort of round robin around the room to get ideas or to make sure that people are bought in. We give, I give one of the senior members of my team the chance to talk about what their team's doing. And then we have our, 24-year-old social media manager give the entire team an update on what's going on social media. And we have other folks like our, again, like she's been out of school for a couple of years. This is her first job. We give her the opportunity to give everybody an update as far as what's going on in our project management system. So I think things like that where I hate to say forcing because that sounds negative, but we're sort of forcing them to tell us like, hey, what are you working on? How can we contribute to that? And be proud of that work, because there are not that many people who are a couple of years out of school running all of the social media elements of a, multi-million dollar 7-state practice like we have. So it's cool to give them the opportunity to shine a little bit. But I think there's more that can be done to continue to affect their ability to brag about themselves in a positive way. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, and for me, my leadership team is made up of majority is women, and we have the opportunity for everybody to speak up in our leadership meeting every Friday, where we go around the room and open it up to let them have the opportunity to brag, like you're talking about, Peggy, and the opportunity to say what's going on. And I continue to encourage. We talked about Slack and digital communication earlier, or text, or whatever it might be. And I continue to encourage those on my team to really take charge, make decisions, empower them to make those decisions and to bring me solutions. And 9 out of 10 times, even probably 9.9 out of 10 times, I go with their decision. We might tweak it a little bit, might rephrase it a little bit, but having them come to the table with the idea and the solution first, as opposed to not having a voice in the room.
Mm-hmm. Well, you both are already doing it. I think one suggestion that I would have is to say, um, to vocalize how important it is for everyone to be recognized and for their ideas to be heard, their opinions to push back, to give feedback, even if it's difficult, and also how much of a proponent you are in having them toot their own horn. And I think reiterating this message is really important, but you're doing it, but I think the messaging could go along with it as well.
That makes a lot of sense because it's not a one-off thing, right? It has to be perpetuated until it becomes cultural.
Right. And I have a thing that I go through with my clients called a State of the Union. And I say, just like the president gives a State of the Union every January, you need to give a State of the Union, regardless of whether you're just new to the job or new to the organization, but you should have a State of the Union at least once or twice a year. And what that entails is, what is your vision? What are your values? What do you think is crucial for this team to succeed? How do you like to communicate? How do they like to communicate? What drives you crazy about communicating? Your leadership style. And I instruct them to reiterate that throughout the year in smaller messages. But I've had so many executives who say to me, I don't understand why these people are writing me these long emails. Don't they know that they shouldn't do that? I said, well, how would they know if you haven't told them that drives you crazy?
Absolutely. Well, Peggy, I think this conversation could go for another 2, 3, 4 days, hours, I've really enjoyed it. I know Paul has as well. We're coming up on time here. Uh, we are the Rethink Marketing Podcast. We like to ask each guest, Peggy, what is one thing that you are rethinking? It can be personal, it can be professional.
Rethinking. Okay. I have found in the last 6 months that my executive coaching clients have really suffered kind of emotional ups and downs. And I have had more people on our sessions cry than ever before in my almost 30 years. And you're probably going to ask me, well, why do you think that is, Peg? And I have thought a lot about it. And I think it is because the uncertainty in the world, the stress, the workplace that's on steroids, if you're working from home, there is an advantage to that, but there's also a disadvantage. So I am launching a course on confidence, rethinking how critical it is in every aspect of leadership, of communication, of bragging, women in leadership, that you cannot get up in front of senior folks who make you nervous and have your job on the line unless you have that confidence. You cannot talk about yourself with pride unless you have that confidence. You cannot lead people, go for that big job, that stretch assignment, if you don't have confidence. And I found it men and women. And so that's what I've been rethinking.
I love it. Peggy, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to today? Obviously, we'll ask you how folks can follow up with you and everything in a second here, but
No, but I'm interested. You did an incredible job on researching me, Colin. It's unbelievable. You know things about me that I had forgotten. So, but you had said to me in your initial letter that you recently finished Brag, and it completely shifted your perspective on humility and meekness.
yes.
And you've built some bragalogues and brag bites and continuing to fill your brag bag. And you are like my poster child. Um, and so I'm wondering if there's any information and things that you have been able to really move the needle for yourself. So I'm turning the tables on you.
Absolutely. So I was the person who, when somebody would approach me at work, and I work a hybrid schedule, so I'm in the office a couple of days and I'm remote a couple of days. Somebody would come up to me and they'd say, "Oh, what's going on?" And I would say, "Oh, just the usual stuff." Right. Just because I didn't want to talk about, I was recently inducted into the Hospital National Marketing Hall of Fame. And, that seemed very self aggrandizing. But I realized after reading Brag, and I finished it, I think in maybe October or November of last year, that I was missing out on a lot of really good opportunities for A, to keep people abreast of what was going on, B, to brag about the rest of my team, because for me to just say, oh, the usual things, it was really downplaying their accomplishments. And then 3, I was missing out on opportunities for collaboration, because a lot of, at my organization, marketing is really a support function. We touch a lot of business units, and there were opportunities for me to bring in IT into stuff that I was working on, or bring in finance into stuff I was working on, or HR or what have you. So it really shifted where now I've started to prepare. That's something that I definitely didn't do, right? I was just walking to get my tea, or I was walking to fill my water bottle up. I wasn't expecting to run into the CFO and have him go, "Oh, what's going on?" And now I am, and now I'm prepared for that. And so I think that's been the biggest change. And then I've also tried to shift around a little bit of just the whole mentality of my team about bragging, in a very positive way about what I'm working on. Because what I typically would do is, we sit down for a weekly kickoff. I ask about opportunities, challenges, and victories, and people would go around and they talk about, I have this challenge, or I have this victory, or whatever. And I wasn't doing a really good job of saying, hey, collectively, we accomplished this. And individually, I was working on this project and it just concluded. It was a huge success. To give everybody else an example of this is what it looks like in a way that's not bombastic and self-aggrandizing, to say, matter of factly, here's what I worked on. Here's the impact that it had to our business. So I think those have been the biggest changes, but I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was pithy, to your point. It was concise enough. There's nothing more frustrating than opening a business book up or a sort of self-help, so to speak, book and reading the first like 2 chapters. And then chapter 3 repeats chapter 2 and chapter 4 repeats chapter 3. And you're like, my gosh, this could have been 30 pages. So you did a really good job of weaving in stories and building on the content. And I really enjoyed it. And now I have your other book on my reading list as well. So looking forward to the hard truth about soft skills.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, if you two guys decide that you don't want to be marketing executives anymore, come work with me. All right.
Appreciate the time, Peggy.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Peggy, if folks do want to learn more about the course in confidence, get your books, follow up with you, sign up for your newsletter, how can they do that?
They can do it by coming to peggyklaus.com. I've got a huge website which will tell them more than they ever need to know. And just, give a hello, a shout, and we'll have you in the pipeline, and you'll be on our newsletter and whatever you want to ask me. If you want to bring me into organizations or conferences, that's how you get in touch with me.
Fantastic. Well, Peggy, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Terrific, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.